Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special oration, and this time by Kanchan Gupta, who is the editorial director of Niti Digital. Its flagship portal, niticentral.com, is a conservative platform for news and views. nwrlive.com is India's only web 24/7 radio service offering bilingual news and views. Kanchan Gupta has worked for several Indian newspapers, including The Telegraph, The Statesman, and The Pioneer. He took a break from journalism to work in the Prime Minister's office, where he assisted the Prime Minister and the National Security Advisor on Foreign and Security Affairs. Later, he served in Cairo as director of the Maulana Azad Center. He is now a member of BJP's National Executive and involved with drafting the party's election manifesto of 2014. Mr. Kanchan Gupta is one of India's eminent thinkers and writers, and I'm privileged to have known him as a friend for a long time. He's very kindly agreed during this election season in India to come here, despite all the other pressing commitments, including finalizing of the manifesto, to come and speak about BJP's grand strategy. There could have been no other person better suited to speak on that subject. Before I invite Mr. Gupta to speak, may I recognize the presence of our Counsel General, Panika Gupta, and all the other eminent and distinguished ladies and gentlemen who are here today. Mr. Gupta.
Thank you, Amitav, for your very kind words. And it's always nice to be talked up, but then you have to live up to the expectation. Well, what happened was that we had this extended Holy weekend, and I thought I would just take a break and come here. And it was worth the effort because I got to get away from Delhi, and I got to meet all of you. Foreign policy, unfortunately, figures rather low on our domestic political agenda. It's something that does not excite popular imagination, unless you're talking about bashing Pakistan or the usual stuff. But that is not foreign policy. And because it does not excite the popular imagination, our politicians also tend not to treat foreign policy with the seriousness it deserves. And ultimately what happens is that once you are in power, you either continue with the consensus or you just make a hash of it, as has happened over the last 5 years of this government which we have right now. Why do I say the last 5 years? Because the previous 5 years during UPA 1, at least there was single-minded determination to get the India-US nuclear deal through. And at a personal level, I was among the few who opposed the agreement, but that was for technical reasons and not for political reasons. The government, in fact, staked its, the Prime Minister staked his office to get the deal through. But that kind of commitment is absolutely absent during the second part of the UPA. In a sense, what we saw was a continuity from the NDA years, the 6 years before Mr. Manmohan Singh took charge as Prime Minister, in pursuing a India-US agenda of active cooperation and strategic partnership. But once that was done, I don't think there was great effort to strategize any further. Instead, what we saw was a single-minded obsession with and about Pakistan. And I will come to that later. One of the few undeniable achievements of the Vajpayee government was to chart a new course in foreign policy. When I say a new course, something which was different from what we had till then, and also to put an end to what we had till then, and that is a very episodic response rather than a medium-term, long-term, strategic response to events as they happened. The advantage which the Vajpayee government had is that an opening of sorts, a beginning of sorts had been started by Prime Minister PV Narasimha Rao, and which in a sense was the beginning of the unraveling of the Nehruvian consensus and what has been described as a morality play. Our foreign policy was always about taking moral positions, striking moral positions, and putting India last. To that extent, credit also goes to Narasimha Rao. In between, we had an interregnum of the United Frontiers, which was an unmitigated disaster for a variety of reasons, more so because of, no matter how well-intentioned he was, Prime Minister Inder Gujral's Pakistan policy, which sort of made us pay a price in the following years. Now, where does Mr. Modi begin? If he were to become Prime Minister, where does he start off from? If I know his mind, I would say he would not want to continue with the status quoist approach which we have right now. And definitely there would not be this kind of obsession with or about Pakistan. He does realize that other relationships have suffered on account of that, especially in our neighborhood. Our relations with Nepal had really nosedived. They have picked up and gathered some traction now, but after the elections, we really don't know which way it will play out. Bangladesh, whereas we should have played a more interactive role, I wouldn't say interventionist, but end of the day, if Sheikh Hasina has succeeded, it's not really because of us. Sri Lanka, we have allowed Sri Lanka to move out of our orbit of influence, which is a tragedy. And it need not have played out that way. I think this would be the first time that foreign policy became a hostage to domestic politics. And an ally was allowed to dictate the country's position on an important neighbor. We know what happened in Maldives and how that also reflects on India's diminishing influence in the region. A couple of other points which I would like to make is, given this backdrop, so what does Mr. Modi do? While drafting the manifesto, one of the things that was kept in mind on foreign policy was his repeated assertion and this is something which he has said from various public platforms, most recently while he was addressing, I think there were 3 interactions with investors and businessmen in Delhi on a single day, and everywhere he made the same point, that the government would like to look very closely at investment, and we would like to push up investment. Linked to that is how we treat foreign policy to promote investment and also link it with trade. So make foreign policy trade-centric. Does it serve India's interest? Does it open up our trade? Yes, go for it. The other point is, of course, the security and strategic part of it. For a variety of reasons, which we really need not elaborate on over here, India-US ties have been uneven, and I don't think India figures very prominently on the American radar as of now. So we need not agonize over it, and we need to look at other options. Unfortunately, nobody talks of those other options, and we need to start talking about them. We need to look Southeast Asia, we need to look at the Indian Ocean. And when I say Indian Ocean, I think we really need to take a serious look vis-a-vis our relations with Australia. Japan, yes, Mr. Modi is very up on Japan. Australia, I don't know, but I guess he would want to look at it. What we know for a fact is that if we just go by his track record as Chief Minister of Gujarat, where I think he's one of the few chief ministers where who has used his office to directly interact with foreign governments, limited of course to investment, limited of course to industry, and he has done it very effectively. And the Gujarat example, if it is sort of, if we take that as a model of his engagement on foreign policy, I guess we can safely suggest that it will be a very innovative approach. It will be an India-first approach, and it will be an independent approach. Now, when I say independent, I don't think he thinks very highly of this bunkum about non-aligned positioning, which is really meaningless now. So there will be a big push on trade, and he would really like to take up from where Mr. Vajpayee left off, that is to give some substance to the aspiration of India emerging as a big power, a great power. I don't think the soft power approach appeals to him, because that has its own limitations. You can go thus far and no farther. Will it be a militarist approach? I don't think so. But to create an economy which is strong enough for India to stand up and be counted, and therefore use your economic clout to engage with the world. This brings us to how do we deal with China if Mr. Modi were to be Prime Minister, would there be a big shift in how we look at China? In terms of immediate visibility, I don't think so. But in the medium to long term, yes. And as far as the BJP is concerned, BJP's position is pretty clear that both India and China can rise together. But when it comes to protecting India's turf, there can be no compromise on that. Now, how we deal with China is also dependent on how we interact with Japan, how we interact with Australia. How do we fashion our Indian Ocean policy? And those are things, I think, which will work out over a period of time. What I can say for sure is that the paralysis which has gripped the foreign policy establishment, we have the Consul General over here, but friends in the South Bloc often express a sense of frustration because there is very little attempt to try and give some sort of a direction to India's approach to the world. And that paralysis must end, and I think that would end. The challenge lies in doing something which is out of the ordinary. And to do that, you need to think out of the box. And you definitely need to rescue foreign policy from, pardon my saying so, from experts. We need to do it. We need to allow a lot of gut feeling to it. This is going to work. And that's how Mr. Vajpayee worked. He sort of first, he would convince himself that this is going to work. And then only he would push ahead with it. Mr. Vajpayee, of course, had the advantage of having Mr. Brajesh Mishra as his colleague. And unfortunately, that won't be the case this time. But what we will have instead is a great deal of clarity in policy. So there will be no ifs and buts, there will be no shadow play. And that's not how Mr. Modi works. And to that extent, I think others would also know where India stands and how best to deal with India, on which I think there is some, or maybe a great deal of lack of clarity right now. The three other things which we are looking at in the manifesto is to recraft the overall security policy. And the reason I mention it here in this context is because that would also have a certain amount of foreign policy input. That we want to bring in food, energy and water under our security policy or security strategizing umbrella. And energy, of course, is a very big thing. And if Mr. Modi is insistent on achieving in 5 years what he would like to achieve, and that's 24/7 power, then we are looking at a situation where there has to be a 4-fold increase in the primary energy source supply and slightly more than 6-fold increase in electricity, our own production of electricity. These are, of course, slightly long-term projections. We are talking 2025, but you have to begin now. And for energy, of course, you really need to have a very strong, very a dependable basis, which is essentially about how well you play out your foreign policy, how well you are able to ensure that your sources are not disrupted, your sources are reliable and assured. On water too, I think there will be some amount of policy reformulation, because as you know that one of our big concerns right now is about China building all its dams and how that impacts our water supply. Not much can be done, unfortunately, about our water agreement with Pakistan. It was a giveaway. We are stuck with it. But how best not to allow that to expand any further. And food, of course, is a domestic issue. But here again, we are looking at huge investments, technology investments in agriculture, and to increase productivity, because land would constantly be under pressure. And as I was explaining to our Professor De Costa here on Sunday, that Mr. Modi has a very ambitious plan of urbanization. So if that much land is being taken away, we need to look at other options to boost agricultural productivity, and that is where farm technology comes in. Again, this is technology that has to be essentially imported, at least to begin with, and this is where relations with individual countries becomes important. Broadly on the economic front, the situation is pretty grim, when the only glimmer of hope is that when Mr. Vajpayee took over, and it's a very coincidental thing, the Indian economy was growing at 4.8%. I'm just rounding off figures. When he demitted office, that particular quarter, the economy was growing at 8.4%. And now if Mr. Modi were to become Prime Minister, he would inherit an economy which is growing at 4.8%. So you have to really work hard to push it up. These are some of the points I thought I wanted to make, but more importantly, I would like to hear your views and answer any questions which you may have, because that makes it easier. I would know what really you are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that really overarching view about of Mr. Modi and the BJP's grand strategy. GOG has been live tweeting your talk, so I have had a couple of responses from our friends in California. Kamla Bhatt, who runs a radio station, wants to know that you said that BJP believes that India and China can rise together. How can that happen? What will happen to the border conflict? And what is the BJP's position on Tibet? I mean, you're free not to answer questions which you...
No. When I say India and China can rise together, this is a stated position. India cannot stop China's rise. You have to take a realistic position on this. But nor should China's rise become an impediment for India's rise. And therein lies the challenge, that how you are able to rise along with China. And I did also mention that this is not a position of compromise. This is a position of telling China that you do your thing, I do my thing. And if you try to, putting it very crudely, don't mess with me.
Live and let live.
Yeah, and so the incursions which we are talking about along the LAC, when Mr. Vajpayee was Prime Minister, as you would know, they had agreed on this principle that settled areas and peace and tranquility shall be maintained along settled areas, and settled areas will not be disturbed. So we have to ensure that the principle of peace and tranquility is maintained. And I'm sure if Beijing realizes that there's a strong government in Delhi, that you have a Prime Minister who's very firm on where he stands and how he perceives the situation, that kind of irritation will also come to an end. We cannot deny the fact that China has been greatly emboldened by political, I won't call it exactly instability, but the fact that the Prime Minister has not been able to be assertive has also emboldened Beijing. And you have a foreign minister, I do not wish this to sound as a criticism, but when a foreign minister is seen to be overtly pandering, that doesn't help either. On Tibet, I think the position that was taken by Mr. Vajpayee's government remains.
Kok, can you tweet it to Kamala Bhatt as well? If you. Okay, please, man, and then Nirupma, and then Nicholas, and then Madhu.
I was reading recently that in some areas of manufacturing, India is in fact taken over from China. Do you have any comment on that?
I really wouldn't know, but if you look at the sheer scale of manufacturing in China, to even reach halfway mark, we have to work hugely, hugely hard on it.
Now, I'm talking about the automotive industry in particular.
Sorry?
The automotive industry?
The automotive industry, yes, because, but you know, when Mr. Modi talks about reviving the manufacturing sector, he's really talking of mass manufacturing. Because one of the causes of concern right now is about jobs disappearing or jobs not being created fast enough. And mass manufacturing would definitely contribute to creation of both skilled and unskilled jobs. The incentives that are being proposed, I won't go into the details because the draft has not been cleared, but a whole set of incentives are being proposed to sort of both revive manufacturing and also invite domestic and foreign investment in mass manufacturing. That will be one of the key thrust areas as far as the economic agenda of the government is concerned.
Okay, Nirupma Subramaniam of the Hindu newspaper and a visiting fellow. Nirupma, please.
Kanchan, you just mentioned that the last government, the government now, has been very obsessive about Pakistan. I wonder if, if Mr. Modi were to become Prime Minister, his government might also need to be, because of the situation that is developing in that region, any government would have to be willy-nilly obsessed with Pakistan. And also for another reason, if you say that the focus is going to be on building up your energy requirements, all your energy sources lie beyond Pakistan. In Pakistan and Afghanistan are essential. You need to have a peaceful, stable Afghanistan, Pakistan. You need to be friends with those countries for that to build up those energy resources.
Okay, Nirupama, when I say that obsessed with and obsessed about Pakistan, the suggestion was not that you declare Pakistan an enemy state.
Or ignore the...
Or ignore Pakistan. You are right when it comes to Afghanistan, but even on Afghanistan, I don't think we have been, we are particularly clear about where we wish to be, what kind of a role we wish to play in post-withdrawal Afghanistan. And this is where clarity of policy comes into play. So we need an Afghanistan policy which factors in Pakistan, but which is not hinged on Pakistan, because the moment you do that, your own perceived role in Afghanistan gets limited. Do we stop dealing with Pakistan? Of course not. A stable, peaceful, prosperous Pakistan is in India's interest.
Cog, make sure you tweet that. A stable, peaceful, prosperous, moderate Pakistan is in India's interest.
No, I didn't use the word moderate. And because you see, India cannot moderate Pakistan. It's Pakistan alone which can moderate itself. But whether they moderate, whether they decide to moderate, don't decide to moderate, a stable Pakistan, a peaceful Pakistan, and a prosperous Pakistan is no doubt in India's national interest. But does that mean you just chase peace with Pakistan to the exclusion of chasing relations with other countries? That's what I meant when I said you obsess with Pakistan. And there's no denying the fact that if Mr. Manmohan Singh will be remembered for anything in history, it's his strange obsession with Pakistan. It doesn't work like that. Mr. Vajpayee also dealt with Pakistan, and it was not always a very happy dealing. But yes, you try, and you try it on your terms.
Kanchan, what you have described through your talk is really a very prudent, pragmatic, growth and trade-driven foreign policy agenda, rather than the kind of muscular, militaristic view that you intuitively, some people feel that Modi's foreign policy will be much more muscular and militaristic. Is this a complete misreading of what Modi stands for, this kind of caricature, you might say, that has been made of his?
No, that's the point which I explained, that, when we talk of hard power, we always tend to think in terms of guns and battleships and bombers. No, I mean, if you are strong, if your economy is strong, and you are once again able to project yourself as the happening place in the world as far as the market goes, as far as the economy goes. The India story. The India story was what drove India's profile during those 6 years, or the latter half of those 6 years. And we need to revive that India story and further strengthen it with a very muscular economy, a robust economy. And once that happens, that becomes the projection of your power. So, in popular perception, of course, hard power means that, you have an army which goes forth and conquers. But here, why not think in terms of a market which goes forth and conquers.
Traditionally, power is exercised through three means. You beat them, or you buy them, or you seduce them. What you're saying is...
You seduce them.
Oh no, seduce is more soft power. So buy them is the economic part. You bribe them, or you beat them, or you seduce them. Yeah, Madhu and then Nick. And then.
Okay, I have two questions for you.
But Nirupama, I hope I made sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now
sorry.
she can safely go back.
Okay. My first question is, do you think if Mr. Modi comes into power, he will be able to build a consensus so the whole country rallies behind him? And secondly, how will he deal with his detractors who have compared him to Hitler, as well as questioned the validity of high court judgments and maligned him really? How will he deal with that?
Okay, there are two parts to your question. Consensus, you see, I would think that Mr. Modi's agenda would be an economy-dominated agenda. And right now there would be enormous consensus on that, because everybody realizes that we are virtually on the edge of the precipice and you could just topple over. Everybody also realizes that in a country where 65% or maybe even 70% of the population is age 35 and below, you have to start mending your economy. You have to start creating jobs. You have to start looking at investment. You have to start looking at infrastructure development. The aspirations and demands are huge. The standard to which Modi will be held would be something like the golden quadrilateral. So how does he take it beyond? He's already talking in terms of the platinum quadrilateral. That's the 75th anniversary of independence, where you use high-speed trains, popularly called bullet trains. So can he do it? He's talking of building 100 new cities. The last new Indian city which was built in India was Chandigarh. Since then we have satellite townships coming up. We don't have independent cities coming up. So 100 new smart cities is a very big, tall order. So I can't imagine there not being consensus on these issues. Yes, there would be a certain amount of disagreement on how the thing is spread out. I mean, who gets how much of what share of the cake? But those are things which you work out as you go along. As far as the political part of it is concerned, look, it's only in India that you can get away with such frivolous references to Hitler and Holocaust. Anywhere else, in any other decent society, you try to do that, you would be shamed and shunned, if not prosecuted. You demean the victims of the Holocaust when you do this. So I don't think it bothers Mr. Modi particularly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to last out this full 10 years. When it comes to court judgments, I could get into a very long explanation that first you go to court, then the court gives its order, you're not happy with the order, you go back again, court sets up an SIT, you're not happy with the composition of the SIT, you get its members changed. SIT gives its report, you're not happy with the report. And it goes on and on and on. This is the grievance manufacturing industry. Every country has one. You live with it.
Nicholas was an advisor to former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. And in one television program, Mr. Modi was described as India's Tony Abbott. I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't want to damn you with that praise. My question goes to trade-centric foreign policy. The push by Mr. Modi and the BJP to trade-centred.
That's what he talks about.
Yeah, because I want to say, critics of that approach would say that can help you with some relationships, but with your most important foreign relationships, it's only going to get you so far. There's two case studies here. One is the approach of China, say, to African countries with a questionable human rights record, where they go in and they say, look, we don't want to quibble with how you run your country, but we can do trade together and we can both benefit. And to an African country with a questionable government, that's a good approach. But then you see the case study of the new Abbott government with China, where they thought that the trade bonds between China and Australia was so great that they could go around Asia and say things like Japan is our best friend in Asia, causing offence to the Chinese, and then they find that suddenly an Australia-China free trade agreement timetable gets pushed back. Suddenly Australian ministers going to China find that they're no longer meeting as senior people in the Chinese government, and so the Chinese, just in their own way, downgrade the relationship. So there are two case studies of how trade can be used or misused in a relationship depending on the nature of the relationship. I just wonder if you could...
See, I don't think India, or for that matter any other country, should really get too involved with the internals of the other country. Whether there are human rights violations, whether there's ideal democracy. By that yardstick, we shouldn't really be dealing with Pakistan at all. It doesn't work, it should not work like that, and that's where I began from. This running commentary of morality, which used to be our standard foreign policy, or what used to pass off as foreign policy, that era is over. I mean, we may love to believe that we can sit in judgment and we can try and influence the internal processes of a second country. It doesn't work like that. They will just shut their doors on you. I think there is a lot of, or there is emerging consensus between countries like Japan, Australia, India, on something like China's rise and China's expansionist ambitions. So we really need to work together. What will be the framework of that working together? How exactly you will flesh it out is one part of it, and that's the security strategic part of it. But to make that happen and to give it some kind of a life force, you need to look at trade. And when I say trade, for instance, with Australia, we have to, no offense meant to those of you who are here from the university, we have to look beyond education, or we have to look beyond coal. It has to be something which may not be tantalizingly big, but which is of which is sustainable and which grows over a period of time. Can Australia help with agricultural technology, with food processing technology, dairy products technology? Of course, there's the unstated part of it that as and when and if the nuclear power plants come along, what kind of deal will Australia offer in terms of uranium supplies? Those are areas that really need now to be worked on.
We have a large number of questions. This tells you how much interest there is in this subject. So I'll have to take 3 or 4 together. The gentleman there has been waiting, and I'll then gradually come here. Everyone will get a chance as long as you make it really quick. Yes?
Thank you. I think half of the thing Nicholas covered covered it. Australia is also facing the same problem when they try to cut trade with China.
Yeah, please go ahead.
US, they have a security thing. So how do you think that you want to balance this US and China things when you try to go for India's case, like US is important part,
Yeah, I think we've got the question. Swati?
Very quickly, what is going to happen to the Pravasi Indians? Because Modi has a huge support among the
diaspora.
So particularly with dual citizenship, if you can comment.
Yeah, that line, anyone? Yeah, you and you, sir.
Yeah, my question is, how is Modi going to engage the world on economic issues when most of the economic policy leaders are controlled by state governments?
Okay. Sorry?
How is he going to use economics as an instrument of his foreign policy when economics is driven by states? Federalism and, yeah.
My question is about relationships with China. I'm particularly thinking about the speech that Modi made late last month, which is widely interpreted as being quite an aggressive speech, an attack on expansionary mindset of China. What was the intention behind that speech?
The speech in Arunachal.
And furthermore, I also understand that there are joint military exercises planned later on this year. Would Mr. Modi continue with that sort of military cooperation and military engagement?
You mean with Australia?
No, with China.
Oh, China, joint exercise with China. In this line, yes, please.
So we've been talking about in one direction, talking about economic growth and become a large power in a few years, and that would become played as a security strategy as well. And then we're talking about live and let live with China and Japan and Australia triumphantly. So we're talking about so many things having a contrasting view in terms of strategy. But we are losing grounds on a tactical basis. So what are the immediate tactical things that can come on the ground immediately so that if we have to make a decision on something in one direction, we make it?
Okay. In this line? Yeah, please go ahead.
Mr. Gupta, my question is really basic. That one of the things which we talk about that India is lacking in foreign policy, one of the obstacles is the limited number of diplomatic service personnel which we have. So basically, it's a very structural problem.
Capacity issue.
Exactly. So will there be a major structural reform under Mr. Modi?
Okay. Yes.
We talked before about consensus, and it seems to me that you understand all the challenges that Modi would face in terms of developing consensus. I mean, it's clearly better or worse, a divisive figure in India. There are different opinions of him, and also in the international scene, Western countries appear to be uncomfortable with some of his positions. I mean, we haven't even talked about the fact that the US only started speaking to him a few weeks ago.
Ashik?
Given that 1984 and 2002 are constantly kind of pitted against each other as which one's bigger and who was the bigger
Which
one?
is worse than what, the other?
Yes, my question is there a kind of grand strategic position on the two problems?
Professor Ratna Ghosh from McGill. Yeah, everyone will get a chance.
You talked about the economic aspect of the strategy several times. Is there do you have any comment on a social strategy? People like Amartya Sen have, for example, pointed out that in Gujarat, economically they've done well, but the social agenda has really suffered a lot.
Shantanu?
So my question was regarding that despite its various shortcomings, India's secularism has certain distinctive features. So how does sort of Modi try and and BJP in general talk about things like Hindutva, because it is definitely in our national interest, and how do they try and deliberately show it as a religion neutral term, whereas it is not?
Yeah. Last question.
With the BJP policy announcements and all the costing details, if no costing details, don't you think that's credibility?
Councillor General, would you like to ask something? Thank you. And you have 5 minutes.
So I can happily skip. No, a very quick run through. How do you balance out with the US, if I got your point right? And linked to that would be another question about, somebody raised this, I think you raised this point about how the West and the US feels about Modi.
I hope that's not Mr. Modi. But he did call him a few
मैं कुछ देर में फ़ोन करता हूँ आपको. हाँ हाँ, मैं अभी 10 मिनट में आपको फ़ोन करता हूँ. मैं 10 मिनट में अच्छा, मैं बात करता हूँ आपसे. Now, as far as the US is concerned, the Americans are a very practical and pragmatic lot. They have sensed which way the wind is blowing, and they have started working on mending fences. I don't think Mr. Modi has any animus towards America, but at the same time, I don't think, and this is my personal view, we should not make our foreign policy or our global engagement America-centric, or link it to our relations with America. Our relations with America is special in its own way, and so would be our relations with others. As far as Europe is concerned, they have already made peace, and that's where we stand. Overseas Indians, yes, even during Mr. Vajpayee's rule, I think there was a great effort to involve Pravasi Bharatiyas, and I think even an ambassador was appointed for this purpose. So they would continue to, or they would play a more involved role. Exactly how, I think that falls into place only when government comes into place. Economics and being a state issue, somebody raised this point. States have, or what is being offered, is greater fiscal autonomy for state governments. But let me also assure you that an increasing trend, states are increasingly clamoring for investment. And if you have a central government which facilitates that kind of investment, or which guides investment towards states. Now, what Mr. Modi has said is that there is a uneven spread of economic development. You have Western states doing well, you have Eastern states not doing well. So how do you strike a balance between the two? And that is where the central government can play a facilitator's role. And I don't think, again, when I talked of consensus on economic issues, I think there is a whole deal of consensus that something needs to be done, and needs to be done urgently. And this whole rights-based approach is not going to work. That is not going to, that's not the way to get your economy up and going. About expansion, about China's expansionism, yes, I did talk about it, that only if you have a strong government, a government which is very clear about how it perceives others and how it is willing to deal with others, that is where you can put in obstacles. As far as India is concerned, if China wants to play an expansion, wants to indulge in expansionism elsewhere, that would be for that country to deal with. Tactics, well, right now you can only have strategy. Tactics come into play only when you are in power and you have the advantage of the establishment working with you. Capacity building, a very radical approach would be to merge and this is my personal view, not necessarily Mr. Modi's view, would be to merge commerce and foreign ministries.
To make it a DFAT.
Make it into a DFAT. That would be the logical thing to do. Whether it will ever be done in our system, I don't think so, not because the IFS would oppose or the IAS would oppose, but that would also mean one ministry less. Let's not forget it. This whole thing about social agenda. Professor Amartya Sen, I mean no disrespect to him, means a lot in IIC. But beyond IIC, I think he doesn't matter at all.
The IIC is an intellectual liberal hub in Delhi called the India International Center. Just decoding that.
Social development and economic development go hand in hand. Is Gujarat a perfect state? No, it is. Nobody is claiming that Gujarat is a perfect state. But Gujarat has shown that a whole lot of things can be done without the union government propping you up. And that should be and that is also now the urge among other states. One of the big ideas in the manifesto would be to how best to deal with absolute poverty. No, I mean, and this is a point which Mr. Modi has repeatedly made, is that dole cannot be the solution to it. You cannot lift people out of absolute poverty only through dole. Hindutva, I don't think that really figures in today's discussion, but since you have raised it, I don't think anybody is talking about Hindutva right now, so there's really no reason to talk about it. And if you go back to the Reuters interview, he was described as a Hindu nationalist, but which one?
The BJP.
Oh yes, because I mean, the BJP, for BJP, Hindutva is an article of faith, but Hindutva is not Hinduism in the sense that you cannot limit Hinduism to Hindutva, or you cannot say that Hindutva is reflective of Hinduism. Hindutva is more a conceptual thing, that it's about your cultural civilizational identity. It doesn't distinguish between one faith and another faith.
Kanchan, one last question which he had is
about costing details.
Yeah.
It's very difficult in our system to carry out an exercise where you say that I'm promising 100 new cities and this will be the cost, because A, you really don't have any idea what is the state of government's finances.
How are you going to raise the money?
So it's only when you move into office you get a more correct picture, number one. Number two, Mr. Modi is very clear on two things. One, government must minimize its role in terms of interfacing with business, with investors, with trade, with industrialists, and let this become more. The role of government should be that of a facilitator, initiator of the process, and you have proper monitoring systems in place, and leave it at that. So when you are talking of 100 new cities, you're not talking about government going and building those cities. You're talking about the private sector being asked to invest the money to build those cities. So we are talking of the PPP route, where government involvement is really
as an enabler
and not the financier of the project. Yeah.
The final question was about 84 and 2002.
84 and 2002. 2002 is a process that continues, and a whole lot of people have been found guilty. That process continues. 1984, yes, you can set up yet another commission, but I think what would be far more useful would be to take the last Commission of Inquiry's report, revisit it, and see if any actual prosecution can be done. Unfortunately, that report came after the Vajpayee government's exit. And you have to also keep in mind a huge amount of time has passed. But does that mean that you write off prosecution? No, you don't. You have to confront those who have been accused. You have to ensure that there is a proper, acceptable closure.
For both.
For both.
On that note, Kanchan, thank you very much for traveling this long distance, for presenting an overview, and for answering in detail all the questions, comfortable and uncomfortable, on a variety of issues. We wish you best of luck with the manifesto and with the election, and do come back again. Thank you.